Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. My name's José Barzola. Welcome to our Careers in Peacebuilding Talk Story series. I'm here joining from the Matsunaga Institute for Peace at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Our talk story today is on coaching for Peacebuilders with Jim Herman and Chris Lenshyn.
Yeah, good job, man.
Yep. Thank you. And obviously moderated by myself, José Barzola today. Thank you for joining us today to learn about journeying into the profession. Our event today is co-sponsored by HonuLei Connections, LLC, that provides executive and life coaching, consulting, and facilitation. To learn more, you can contact our speaker, Jim Herman, at Jim, J-I-M, at HonuLei.com. And I'll put the email in the chat a little later, unless Jim has done that already. Thank you for joining us to learn about Jim and Chris, who will explore the benefits of coaching for peace builders and conflict resolution practitioners. Jim will also discuss how to become a coach and the differences among coaching, mentoring, therapy, and consulting. One of our special guests today is Jim Herman. Jim and his wife formed HonuLei Connections, LLC, which provides executive and life coaching, consulting, and facilitation. After he retired as a U.S. diplomat, he has a master's degree of Eastern Mennonite University and the Army War College, and I added a bachelor's of arts from the University of Hawaii here at Manoa. So you are an alumni of here.
Exactly. That's right.
You should add that to all your bios.
That's right. I should. Thank you.
And our other special guest is Chris Lenshyn, who currently is working as a contractor for the Canadian Armed Forces in their Restorative Engagement Program. He's also a former pastor, and is completing his master's degree in restorative justice at Eastern Mennonite University, and he has been coached by Jim for the past 2 years. And hopefully that's been a wonderful journey.
I should have asked before I invited him.
Thank you both for being here today. As you can tell, there's going to be lots of joy and laughter in today's dialogue. I'm really excited for this. But to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Chris with a few questions. And please, for anyone out there, feel free to jump in and unmute yourselves if you have questions, or if you don't want to interrupt me, you can also just add it to the chat and we can filter questions through that manner. Well, thank you, Chris, for being here today. And I understand, let's see, could you tell us a little bit about your experience being coached and what's worked for you? And let's start out with what's worked for you.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think the other one's a longer answer. I think what hasn't worked. Yeah. Thanks for this. And yes, Jim, I have had a good experience being coached by you, which is why it was pretty easy to say yes to this. But I think it's important actually to start off about why or what it is, what has worked for me being coached, was to actually be when I was presented the option to be coached, I actually had to think through it, because I always thought that coaching was a bit hokey, to be honest with you, and may not provide any practical value, because my guess about what coaching was, I come from a sports, and so Jim and I often work in sports analogies in our conversations, and so that's kind of the only coaching that I had a frame of reference for. And to think about that and applying it to the profession or professional development or work related or personal goals, that was something that was a bit of a stretch for me. But Jim and I met in class at Eastern Mennonite University, and he talked a little bit more about what coaching was there. In different, he always slipped it in there in his answers in class too. I'm a coach, by the way, and then he would go into his answers. But through his process of getting credentialed, and I can't remember, Jim, forgive me about where you got your credentials from, but I actually became more and more interested in it. And when the option to take a couple hours with him being coached came up as an opportunity, I jumped on it and thought that there could be some practical value here. And there ended up 2 years later, there certainly has been. And I think it did take a little bit of time for me to get acquainted with the process of being coached and what it took, not only from Jim, but from myself. Is kind of cliche to say you get what you put in, and coaching really has that vibe to it. And so I got a sense of that right away. And the things that we worked through did take a little bit of time for me to get a sense on. And so working through mental reps, we would call them. So to think through and understand how things would impact my body or my brain or my mindset, like those types of things were were really, really foreign concepts to me. And so we would spend time just sitting and working through mind reps, mental reps that would, help me understand where my thought process was, where I was grounded in, whether it was in my anxiety or in my body, like how I was feeling in my body, and getting a sense on that. And so those parts of coaching were something that was a bit of a surprise for me, but something that I found very, very valuable. And I think the other part about being coached is like just having a good, clear mind that is outside of my context to help me, understand or talk through things that are happening, like a third perspective, like a secondary perspective, not unbiased per se, but a perspective that would ground me, help me understand where my mindset is, and to think creatively and constructively about how to proceed in difficult contexts. And so one example that I can think of off the hop is when I first came back into BC and I caught on with a restorative justice organization here. I was tasked with crafting a mental health project, and this thing failed miserably, by the way, and not because of Jim, but failure is fine. Yeah, but one of the things that I had to really lean into was I had to sell this thing to multiple partners in different contexts that I'd never been familiar with. And so I sat with Jim and I had a conversation about, man, this is how I'm feeling. This is what it feels like. I don't feel like I've got a lot of confidence to work through and do this. And so we went through mind reps where I was pretending I was Michael Jordan or other folks to really get a sense of, where and what is my mindset going into, and where is my fear coming from, or anxiety, or even doubts. And so in that space, we talked about, the sage and this, and Jim can do some explaining on this if you would find it valuable in this context. But I remember giving him my elevator pitch for this. I don't know if you remember this, Jim, this elevator pitch for the mental health project. And it's the first time I've probably ever given an elevator pitch in my life, except for, when I want to talk to my wife about buying a video game or something. So I had like 2 or 3 minutes to talk through this project. And at the end of it, I'll never forget it. He's like, man, that was terrible. Not in like a harsh way, but it was like,
I think I said that sucked. I don't think I used the word terrible.
Terrible, maybe terrible. Yeah, terrible, wasn't it? It did suck. And it's liberating to be able to have a relationship with somebody in the sense of they can just straight up tell you that something sucked. And it comes from a good place, not a place of anything other than we want you to do better here, or we want to figure out how to do this better. And I've been in different contexts, in different places and spaces with colleagues, and as a pastor working for the federal government now, doing some side contract work with my civic government as well. And those types of relationships and those types of places and people to talk to just aren't around everywhere. And that kind of really solidified why it was really important for me to connect with Jim. And that was probably one of the things that made me realize how valuable coaching was. I didn't feel like my feelings were hurt. I didn't feel really fragile or disappointed, but it was more of an awareness of, okay, this can be better. That did suck. This can be better. And so we would jump into sports analogies and that kind of thing. And so if I play basketball and I coach basketball as well. And so clarity is compassion. If I see a kid who needs to work on their footwork for a left-handed layup, for example, it's important to understand how to share and connect with them and talk about how to improve that. And that's been I've come to Jim with multiple stories or multiple things to think through, and we've gone through very similar processes like that, and it's been incredible in terms of being coached. So the value of coaching is there, and I'm talking a long time, so I'm going to step back a minute and happily engage the next question.
Thank you so much. That was actually, you covered a couple of additional questions I had up ahead, but no, that was very insightful. And I'll give you a break a little bit, and then we'll turn it over to Jim right now. Then and
That'll be a long break. Thank you.
Well, don't worry, we'll come back for at least one more question with you.
Right.
Jim, maybe you can help us a little bit by what is exactly coaching? You know, since you are the one providing the service for those that are you know might be, you know, Chris made it, you know, thought it was a little hooey, like it's like, oh,
Yeah.
like, so are you going to be like on the sidelines, like cheering people on, which obviously is not, you know, like
Right.
maybe in spirit, you know, you're there.
Exactly. Yeah. So coaching has kind of become all things to all people, which is why I think it's important to talk about what we mean by coaching. And if you're seeking out a coach, it's to be very clear with the person what your expectations are and what their expectations are. So the way it's come to me, the way I understand coaching is that it is my job is to hold space. You know, psychological safety is critical these days. Everybody talking about it. And it's creating a safe space for the people to be able to share what they need to share, to cry when they need to cry, to curse when they need to curse, to be told that what they're doing sucks when they need to be told that, so that it doesn't, you know, deeply scar them. Anyway, I don't use that word, well, maybe once a session or something. But the idea is that it's a really deep relationship that you're building with somebody, and that you're trying to put the full attention on what they need. You know, sometimes it's just mirroring what they're saying, and you can repeat back and they hear the words coming from your mouth and they say, oh my God, that's not what I meant. Sometimes it's giving them some clear feedback so that they know when they're performing well or not performing well. Sometimes it's maybe helping them look at things from a different perspective. And so it's a lot of things. I started my coaching back in the 90s with a program created by John Whitmore, who created something called the GROW program, which is really focused on performance. And it was perfect for a business environment. And the idea, though, starts with putting the attention on where the company wants to go and how you as a manager can help your team get to that place. And again, it starts with creating psychological safety, and it's been my default management style for the past 20 years, basically. And the biggest thing I had to unlearn, so the difference between coaching as a manager and coaching as an executive coach, is it doesn't really matter where I want to go. It is 100% where the person I'm coaching wants to go. I have had people I've coached make horrible decisions from my perspective in a coaching session. And the only thing you can do is say, awesome, let's see how we can get there. If they ask my advice, I probably won't give it to them. Very often I will step up and turn into a mentor, but it's a very clear distinction, right? Mentoring is kind of like giving guidance to people on where to go. And very often mentoring sucks because it's from a person who's giving the advice perspective. If a mentor doesn't take the time to get to know you and what your strengths and weaknesses are, their advice is worth probably zero, and maybe less than zero. So mentoring is really, it's kind of focused on the individual, but it's more giving advice. Coaching is holding space and asking open-ended questions so people can come up with answers themselves. Therapy, there's a lot of different types of therapies out there. I use a lot of therapeutic tools in my coaching, but therapy is really, from my perspective, it's looking at more deeper psychological issues. And I would say the majority of people I coach actually come from therapy, have had some therapy of some sort. And if they're in the midst of therapy, I always make sure that they tell their therapist what my tools are and have them call me if they want to chat with me to make sure I don't underdo anything that they're working on. And so the critical thing about coaching is, from my perspective, it's 100% focused on the coachee, the person being coached, and it's in their service that we're working. So, and part of the reason to expand a little bit more about why I think coaching is important in peace building, Chris and I came from an amazing school that does this really well, amazing practitioners. I've worked with Peacebuilders for almost 30 years as a diplomat in various places in the world. And it's really heartbreaking to see people who are passionate, who are so talented, but they get in their way as they get in their own way as they try to work through these complex issues that they're working on. And what a good coach can do is they can hold the space for people to help them get out of their own way, figure out their limiting beliefs, give them some tools to help them grow in ways that are beneficial to them and to the people they serve. So that's a medium short answer. Does that make sense, or shall I clarify something?
No, thank you so much. You covered a lot of ground, but I love the focus, and you answered a lot of I was like, well, how is it different than therapy? And I really appreciate that you have those open lines of communication. And one thing I think that really kind of got across for me is that it's sometimes people just need someone to tell them things bluntly. And unfortunately, for whether it's culturally or society or whatever it may be, or, our loved ones sometimes, try to, well, let's ease into things, let's,
Right.
So you just need that, you're like the mom that basically is like, what's going on?
Yeah, so I would think, so I mean, the truth is, if you're in a good place, we tell ourselves sometimes that we're being kind and nice not to give feedback to people, and very often we're actually harming them by not giving them good feedback.
Yeah.
The difference for me coming from a coaching perspective is I try very hard, and we all make mistakes, but it's to be in their space and to give them the feedback that they need to hear, not that I need to hear. I mean, one of the things that I learned as a managing coach is it starts with curiosity. So coaching starts with curiosity, not the prosecutorial curiosity that my wife uses with me every day. Just kidding, a little bit, but the curiosity of the wonder, like, really, what's going on here? Because when you can connect with that, when you really understand, like in this case where Chris gave the example, is I knew what he was trying to do. I knew what he wanted to do. And what he just did was not going to get him where he wanted to be. So I could say, oh, yeah, that was fine, but it sucked. So he needed to hear that it sucked, and he needed to hear it with kindness and love in my heart. Because I was not benefiting in any way, shape, or form from him getting better, right? That this was all about what he needed to hear in a way that, I don't use that word with everybody, but I do use it with a lot of people, in a way that he needed to hear it so that he could make steps that would make it better. And I'm sure it was a better presentation, elevator pitch. I know certainly by the end of the conversation, it was great. So it's really gauging that relationship and being willing to share what needs to be shared in that moment. And it's so easy when your true interests are the interests of the person you're talking to.
Thank you. I mean, I think it really goes back to what you said earlier about developing that deep relationship with the person you're coaching. So how are there like don'ts in the coaching field? Because I mean, you're basically becoming, are you Chris's best friend? Like,
We hate each other. We hate each other.
You don't officially like hang out outside of like the Zoom world. I'm just kidding.
Right. So so there's always the boundary question in
Yes.
all of this stuff. And Chris and I had never met in person until I went up to Washington, whenever the heck that was. And he's up in Vancouver and I was visiting my family. So we met halfway in Bellingham, Washington, and had a beer and a nice chat. So, and I would say actually the majority of people I coach I've never met in person. Right now I'm coaching, I think 25 people. And I've never met them in person. So it's pretty easy to have boundaries, but
Yeah.
There are definitely don'ts in coaching, but
Yes.
maybe one way to get to that is, so I'm certified as a coactive coach, and coactive coaching is probably the largest coaching in the US and probably in the world. And they have 4 foundational principles. And this is the other reason I think it really fits with Peacebuilding, because the principles really are embedded in facilitation and some of the Peacebuilding, a lot of the Peacebuilding work we do. And one is people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. And so this concept of when you're working with people, I mean, how many times have I said to other people, what's wrong with you? Or are you nuts? But starting from this perspective of everyone is naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, that there's nothing to fix here, that it's what we're at best doing is uncovering things that are blocking you, things that are keeping you from being your authentic self, things that keep you from being the best at what you want to be. It's not fixing anything. And that to me is really important part of coaching. The next one is dance in this moment. So it's all about what's happening to you in this moment. We can talk about things that happened in the past or the things that might happen in the future, but all we can really impact is what's going on right now. And ideally, helping you experience the now will let you let go of some of the anger, the frustration, will let you look in with a very clear sight in these ideas, these constructs that are holding you back. The next piece is focus on the whole person. So a lot of business coaching is focused on specific issues, and that's all they want to do. Coactive coaching and most coaching these days it's the whole person. No matter what topic you bring, and the number of times people bring a relatively superficial topic, coaches don't let you get away with that, right? That they will keep asking and asking and pushing until they get to a root cause. And that root cause can be quite painful to open up and explore. But a coach is going to hold the space and let you know it's okay to do that. And then the other is evoke transformation. So an evoke transformation, and this is the last cornerstone. So it's about not just giving you a technique, right? Not just giving you a tool to use, but to let that tool come up naturally from who you are. I mean, I know how to train people, I know how to teach people, but if I teach you to improve your communication skills and you're an asshole, you're still an asshole with better communication skills, right? So the goal of coaching is to help get you to that better place so that these tools feel natural to you and don't feel manipulative to the people you're working with. Oh, and so what can't you do? So coaching is not about telling people what to do, right? Coaching is not about showing up with your own agenda, which again is really important to peace builders too, that you need to show up with the agenda of whatever group you're working with. You need to build space for that group or those individuals. It's about creating psychological safety. You know, anything you do that doesn't create psychological safety, you should stop doing immediately. So those are the big ones I can think of. And it's not therapy. I'm not here to solve your problems or anything like that. I'm here to hold space for you to uncover what you need to uncover and to move.
Well, thank you. I just want to reiterate something for our audience. In case they didn't catch this, you should ideally get certified in coaching, not just listen to this talk and be like, I'm going to go out there and call myself a coach. Just because for the sake of...
a lot of people do that though.
Yes, I know. And I know sometimes, especially within the field, it's not like certain states have they have different, right. Within the United States, I know that when it comes to like the field of a mediator or a facilitator, some states will require certain certifications while other ones will not. There's no, nothing kind of catching that. And so I don't know how I'm assuming coaching is very similar to that as well. And so I would encourage anyone who's looking for a professional coach to make sure that they are indeed certified and not just, have imagine, Jim, some options. How do you recommend someone be able to confirm that? Is it just like, you wouldn't really be able to like talk to past other people that have been coached, right?
Well, yeah. So, there is, I'll put in here that the coactive coaching folks are the biggest one. There's a lot of others. Then the International Coaching Federation, I'll put that in the chat as well.
Is there like a database of who's like...
On the International Coaching Federation includes people who have been certified through them. So I'm certified with coactive coaching and through this organization. There are a few others, but the truth is the way to tell whether you want to be coached with somebody, almost every coach will have what they call a chemistry session, which will last between a half hour and 2 hours. if you don't feel safe or comfortable, just say no, whether they have a certification or not, right? You have to trust your instincts in this. Do you want to spend, a half hour a week or an hour a week or every other week with this person sharing who you are?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, choose a different coach. I actually turned down quite a few people that I don't feel comfortable coaching. So,
Oh, yeah. No, it makes sense. No, thank you.
Yeah.
I want to just not forget about Chris, who's with us today.
Yes, right.
And maybe Chris could answer a question right now around what has been a downside for you of coaching, or what hasn't worked for you?
Yeah, so that's been a tough question for me to think about because I don't think I really have experienced a downside on this. I mean, there are some things that I think are important to name that I could see being a downside for someone if they are being coached. However, I think what Jim was talking about in terms of not finding the right fit for a coach, I think that's really, really an important one to consider. And so, is talk about psychological safety and chemistry, that psychological safety is such a key part of all of our interactions that if that isn't present or the sense of that doesn't feel very, very tangible, then I can see it being a very, very difficult and difficult experience. I think the other one too that, so before I started doing my work with the Department of Defense in Canada, Jim and I did sessions weekly for a couple months leading into it, and I don't know what his feelings were every Saturday morning, but there were times where I was like, oh man, coaching. Okay, let's get on to it. And so I would sit a couple minutes before, like, what are we going to talk about? Like that kind of thing. Right. And so then we would get into it and be fine. Right. So this isn't certainly a critique, but it's more of like if there isn't a very intentional approach to being coached, I can also see it as a downside. I can see that would be a difficult endeavor to take on because then you end up wasting each other's time, and that's a difficult proposition, I think, in the end, if that would be the case. Having said that, I do know, and I have been in other university contexts where I've been taught by a coach, and I just don't feel like the coaching approach works in every single context, so to speak. So that's another piece that I think I've learned along the way. But certainly the two ones for me that are really, really important are the fit in terms of chemistry and psychological safety with a coach, and the intentionality around being coached. And I think being aware of how often and the frequency that makes sense for coaching sessions is something to work with your coach on if you choose to be coached. But those would be the two that I would name. I haven't, like, Jim's been the only coach that I've used, and so I haven't had like a bad experience with Jim. Even when he told me my elevator pitch was trash. Was that what you said, Jim? I can't remember if it was trash or what word it was.
I'm sure I said suck because that's my go-to word. Yeah.
But I think those two elements are so important: intentionality with being coached and the psychological safety part. I think if you don't have those two working, from my perspective as someone who has been coached, I think it would be a very, very frustrating experience.
Thank you for your honesty. I really appreciate it. I think like I mean, there's just some people in the world that have that aura about. I think like that gut feeling. It's going to be okay if I open up to you. And Jim definitely gives off a good vibe.
Well, thank you. But if I could just chime in, sometimes I have seen it with people I've coached who they share from their perspective too much too early. And it becomes shame inducing for them, right? That, oh my God, I told Jim X, Y, and Z. Honestly, for me, there's almost nothing you could say that would shock me. I've been a consular officer for 29 years. I see what Americans and people do overseas, but for people who are just becoming vulnerable with somebody else, they can feel like they overshare. And even though that session or those sessions can be very powerful, they then regret it. So it's something that as a coach, I have to be very cognizant of, that I've actually seen people withdraw for several weeks or a month after they've overshared from their perspective, because it was just so shame inducing for them. So it, just a note of caution. It's okay to share with coaches. And it's, Brene Brown has a wonderful metaphor for it, I think, in building trust. She talks about her daughter's second grade teacher who had a jar of marbles. And every time the kids did something well, they put a marble in the jar. And every time they messed up, they'd take a marble out. When the jar was full, they had a class party. And so she uses that as a metaphor for how to build trust and know that you're sharing with people. Is every time you tell them something, you put a marble in the jar. And the more marbles in the jar, the more you can trust them. Some people you connect with and you just dive right in the deep end and everybody's fine. But sometimes people are they can feel some shame about some of the stuff they share.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris and Jim. We have a question from the audience. And I'll ask the question unless she wants to chime in. It's a very, low key, yeah. So
Or so frightening, I know. So
I guess I'll go ahead and ask the question. Looks as though there is
you're on mute, Jill.
Oh, there you go. So sorry. Now you should be able to unmute yourself. Oh, these tech issues here or there.
Exactly.
I couldn't unmute because you had it locked.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
There was no psychological safety with that, Floyd. Nice try, Jose. Go ahead, Jill.
That's
Ask
okay.
away. I hope it's a hard question
like
for Chris.
Like most people, I'm super used to Zoom, but it's always a little weird nonetheless. But thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question to either of you or both. I'm a mediator, and so I was just curious to attend this because I've been following Matsunaga for a while, like deciding whether or not maybe I want to take classes. But and I was curious because it talks about peace building, and I think about mediation as peace building. And I've thought about getting coaching, actually not being a coach, but getting coached, but I never did it. But I was curious how coaching is relevant for the practice of mediation, and then what the connection is between coaching and peace building, or how coaching is relevant for peace building.
Chris, do you want to take a shot at that first?
Yeah,
you can say no.
Sure, no, I could say no. I'll pass this to Jim. Thank you. No, I'm good. I think there's a couple areas. One of them, after being coached for a bit from Jim, I took a class at the Eastern Mennonite University for my MA around conflict coaching. And so the topic of mediation and coaching came up. And one of the things that they talked about, and this lady worked for the UN, and I can't remember her name, I apologize, but she talked about how she would be a coach for people who were diplomats going into foreign contexts, and would sit back and observe body language around the room when this person that they were hired to coach was talking. And they would do coaching every morning prior to the day to talk through the events and talk through things that they observed. And so the coaching in that context was a third person, like that third perspective, offering observations about body language in the room. I've also heard of different contexts where coaches also will be working with people who are participating in mediation. So not the mediator themselves, but one of the parties in the mediation, to talk through what the process is like, to talk through outcomes, to talk through other elements of the process itself. So almost like an advocate, in the sense of not necessarily being present in the room during the mediation itself, but to coach around the areas of conflict in that context. And so that's one way to answer that from my class. And so if my prof is listening, I hope I got those right. I think the other question feels a little meta in the sense of the work that I do in restorative engagement and in my community is around restorative justice processes. And so the way that I've worked with Jim around those topics is action and reflection. So, man, Jim, that thing I did this past week was really terrible or trash, or what's the word you use? I keep forgetting.
Yeah,
but
it sucks.
But yeah, it sucked. Yeah, and then we would just talk through it, and just is not necessarily giving it the best credibility. But in terms of like, we would talk through the situation, my read on it, how I felt. And then we would go through almost like a reflection of, well, how would I think about it differently? Or am I even reading it right? Am I too much in my anxieties or my self-conscious that that maybe I'm just totally missing something? And so that gives another lens of even possibility of what the outcomes are or could be, or things that I'm not seeing. And so the relationship between coaching and peace building, I think, is really, really tangible and really, actually, really, really important. After doing this type of work, I don't think that enough peace builders or people in this field are utilizing coaches enough because of those elements. Because I've got theoretical expertise in designing and developing and reflecting and evaluating and understanding impact on programs, but I don't necessarily fully understand that on myself at times. And a coach does a very, very valuable job of that. So there's my answer on that, and so I'll pass it to Jim now.
Okay.
You've got
Thanks.
other questions. Yeah.
So yeah, I like that, Chris. Thank you. So I think part of, to just kind of summarize, part of it is performance, right? That a coach can help you perform better no matter what you're doing. You know, you think about, if you want to think about a sports coach, the best athletes in the world always have coaches, and they're always striving to get better. Somehow for us, that and honestly, peace building mediation, from my perspective, is harder than many sports, right? It is a full contact mental effort. And somehow we assume that, hey, I got my certification, I'm kind of done. We're all kind of sort of taught to be reflective practitioners, but you're just reflecting on the same crap, right? If you're not talking with somebody who can hold space for you and ask you hard questions and reflect back with you. There's a wonderful book by Amanda Ripley called High Conflict, which uses as an example, right, the guy from California, the divorce lawyer, who now shifts into a different context and completely fails. And this is a guy who's written books on this topic, right? So how do you, none of us are immune from this, right? So I have a mentor coach. I've had a mentor coach for 3 years, right? That helps me do my job better, because none of us are perfect, and we can all get some advice and learn new tools. And so the performance piece is fine. The other piece is sometimes we get triggered in this work that we're doing, right? It can be really hard because of our past, or because of just the atmosphere that you're in. Mediation is a deeply personal thing. And if you're not willing to at least touch that personal, I don't think you can be a very good mediator. I mean, my personal opinion, right? That you have to be able to connect at some level with your folks. And that can be hard. And if you don't have a way to share that with somebody and grow from it and reflect on it, and we can all journal and we can all talk to our friends, it's different when you're talking with a coach, especially a good coach. And the other thing that I bring, and not every coach, is I read and study constantly. So I'm always reflecting on, so I bring an eclectic approach to stuff. And if you're struggling in one area, I might be able to offer a tool that might help you in that area. Once we understand, it's one of the few times I step outside of the coaching relationships, right? So have you tried this tool? You might want to work on this. And the other really important thing that we try to do is there's almost always homework at the end of a coaching session, right? So what are you going to work on today? So somebody I was coaching just before this call, he's running a business that has like $280 million worth of stuff he's responsible for. And he's struggling with communicating. And it's like, Okay, so that's not a great thing for you. So what do we need to work on here? And so now he's got 3 things he's going to work on before he meets with me next time. And so the coach holds an accountable space. It's not, I don't care whether he does it or not. It's not my problem. It's his problem. What I care is what worked about that homework, right? You went and you said you were going to do something, and I'm going to check in with you to say, hey, did you do it? And if you say no, I'm curious about, so what about that task was not okay for you? What made that hard? If it does work, well, what worked about it? Because that we can build on, right? That we can figure out what's holding you back from certain tasks, or was it the way that I worded it or you worded it, or what was important in that you weren't able to get stuff done? So that a broader picture, perhaps. That respond to your question, more or less, Jim?
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you for that question. I'm not trying to answer it myself, but I always just like to, what I've learned within the field of peace building, peace and conflict studies, or whatever everyone has a different vision as to what is the umbrella and what's underneath it, and how it's applicable. So I'll share mine. It's around peace building, and that being the umbrella, and how I define it for people, especially as I speak to all ages and groups of people of different, sectors of life and different parts of the world. I talk about it's relationship building. And so I always love asking the question about, what are the skills that you need to develop some healthy, positive relationships? And for the most part, I think that's a very universal question, because, you think about your loved ones or those close friendships you have, and you get the active listening, get the communication. And what I love about that is that's exactly the skills that are utilized in mediation and facilitation and coaching. And so honestly, I think if people had healthier relationships, we'd all be out of a job. But unfortunately, we live in a society and just human nature where we look at being reactive as opposed to proactive in our approaches to everything that we do. And so, honestly, I think it'd be an honor to be out of a job if that was the case.
Right.
Maybe that would be the world peace that we envision one day. But yeah, that's just my own thoughts on your question. But no, I appreciate that. Thank you. So we have a little more time. I don't know if anyone else in the audience has any questions. Please feel free to just unmute yourself, which you can do now, or add it to the chat, whichever one you prefer. I do have some questions here, though, just in case. Let's see what has not been covered, because Jim is pretty thorough. As Chris has insinuated from the beginning.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, please go ahead.
I don't want to hog it, but I do have another question. You don't have anything pressing. So I'm curious also about if you're someone who's doing your own self-exploration in meditation and self-discovery and self-examination, would you still think that, and because you're doing that, you're looking at yourself constantly, you're asking yourself, you're curious about your own thoughts and how your own reactivity, your own behaviors, your own identification with self and all of our stuff. So I wonder if you're someone who does that, how coaching would intersect with that, or even coaching I guess it would be complementary. I wonder if it would even be necessary. Sometimes I feel like we go out and we just have this need to vent all the time. Mm-hmm. And we don't listen, we need to be more quiet sometimes with ourselves, right? And,
what do you think, Chris?
That's a good question. I think for me, certainly in the coaching experience, the self-discovery, the self-exploration has been like an implicit part of it, but it hasn't been like it's a good question, because it's got me thinking halfway through my comment. like one of the one of the things that has been really impactful for me in the coaching with Jim has been just the personal growth uh, and how I react in situations prior to coaching with Jim compared to now is certainly different. And I'm offering this as an example because it was really a self-discovery question. So why do I hold myself to be so perfect all the time was something that I sat with forever. And so we, through the course of coaching, it wasn't like right away Jim's and I are talking about my desire to be perfect all the time. That took a little while to build that psychological safety. However, we did get to a point where I was starting to be curious about what does it look like to be okay with failure and to learn from failure. No, I don't even think we use the word failure. I can't remember, apparently bad words, but like we would venture into this space where we would ask, like, what is it about failing that is so paralyzing for you? And that's a question of self-discovery as much as it is a question of performance and goals and career trajectory and other things. And so I think, again, from a coachee perspective, coaching is what you make of it. And I think that's certainly something that has emerged as a part of my coaching experience that I didn't necessarily anticipate. And so I certainly do think that in tandem with that type of own personal self-discovery without a coach, I can see a coach supporting that in different ways, and that probably would take some thought and some very blatant conversation with a prospective coach to say this is what's going on. But that's really how I hear that question. So thanks for that question. It's that had me going. I like it.
Great. Yeah, and so I would just add that, I mean, one of the truisms of coaching is that most of the impact of coaching happens between sessions, right? That it just kind of sits and percolates along, and then something will happen that'll bring another insight. I'll also say that when I get coached, my coach loves to hear me say, "That's just who I am." It's just like red meat to a coach. It's like, oh, let's dive deeper into that. Let's uncover all of that mess. And because we're really good at protecting ourselves. We're really good at rationalizing things that we do. We have a whole host of these cognitive biases that we bring to everything. And I'll just speak for myself. I'm a pretty reflective person, but none of this work I could have done on my own in any semblance of the time that I've done it with a coach. That they do. Good coaches don't let you get away with halfway answers. They keep poking. So, I mean, one of my metaphors is that is like a poker. I'm really good at poking people. And to me, that's what a coach is supposed to do. You think that this identity is who you are. You think that I've reflected all of this, and you probably have. And there's still more to go. And as I say, in the classes that Chris and I were really fortunate to take, there's amazing people doing amazing work, and there's still a lot of trauma that they haven't got past. There's still a lot of history that they haven't gotten past. There's still a lot of forgiveness that they haven't gotten past. Not everybody, but it is a group, many people are called to the peace building profession because of past traumas or past areas, this righteous anger that they have to change things. And so to me, it's really to help people understand that righteous anger is okay. And if you don't use it well, it can cause more harm than good. There's a story that I share with a lot of people I coach about Ignaz Semmelweis. Do you know him? The guy from the 1850s, Austria. Yeah, I think he was Czech or Hungarian. I know you should know the difference, but he was a doctor at the big city hospital in Vienna, and he was delivering babies. And So there were the midwives who would deliver babies in the hospital, and there were the doctors. And the death rate of children in the space where the doctors were was significantly higher than the midwives. So the outcomes for mothers and babies were significantly better with the midwives. There was to such a degree that the women having babies would try not to go into the hospital when the doctors were there, and they had the doctors' clinics, because the death rates were so much higher. So this guy, Dr. Semmelweis, wanted to study this. This is like the 1850s. And he did a lot of stuff. What's the difference between these two spaces? The procedures were the same. Didn't make any sense that the outcomes were so horrible in the doctors' place. And so they would try all kinds of things. The doctors were on board. And it turns out that he went away on vacation for a while. And when he came back, one of his best friends died of the same disease that the women were dying of in the thing. And as he traced it back, he realized that that doctor had been doing autopsies on the corpses. And so he surmised that maybe, and this was back before germ theory, that maybe the doctor brought up this bad atmosphere or something from the morgues, which was down in the basement of the hospital. So he started having them disinfect their hands and their tools before they left the morgue, before they would actually touch the women. And not surprisingly, the death rate dropped remarkably almost overnight, so that they were actually in better place than the midwives. So this doctor, he had figured it out. He didn't really understand why. There was just something that was magically happening using this disinfectant to clean tools before they touched the wives. It'd be another 35 years before they came up with the germ theory. And so Louis Pasteur, that's who I'm thinking of. But the thing was, he figured this out. He got this technique down that dramatically saved lives. He could not figure out how to convince the doctors that they were doing, that this process would save women. Could not do it. And he couldn't do it because he was an arrogant ass, right? That he was telling these doctors what to do. He was telling them, and the message was basically that you're killing, what the doctors heard was, you're killing these women. And they didn't want to hear it. So they did not adopt the practice at that hospital. He had written it up, and so they were adopting it at other hospitals around the region. But he actually ended up leaving the hospital, and it was another 30 years before that hospital, in particular, and many other hospitals, began to actually understand that they were contaminating and killing the women because they were bringing germs up from other places. And so this is a guy, because he was 100% right in fixing this problem in terms of, you got to clean your hands, you got to clean the instruments. But nobody liked him, and so they didn't listen to what he said. Because of that, he killed tens of thousands, killed is a wrong word, tens of thousands of more women died, maybe hundreds of thousands, and babies, because he wasn't self-aware enough to know how to enroll other people. And that's a dramatic story, but I know a lot of people who are 100% right, but could not convince anybody that they're right, because they're not very nice. They're pushy and they're obnoxious. And so coaches can help people see, and not everybody this way, but coaches can help you see when your behaviors are impacting others in ways that you don't intend. Coaches can help you develop other strategies. And, a lot of people who think they're right, know they're right. And they just know, if I just say 5 more sentences, I'm going to convince you. That works almost 0% of the time, unless you're the boss, right? But for those of us who are trying to influence people from different places of power, knowing how you show up, knowing how you express yourself, knowing the impact of your words is really powerful and important. And it's really hard to do that on your own. Anybody?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm going to just have one quick question that for both of you. And it's more about it's an ongoing question that I love to learn from people, is like, how do you take care of yourself? I mean, you're constantly working with so many people, and I mean, this is a question for Jill too, if she likes, as a mediator, how do you take care of yourself? How do you disconnect from, I kind of figured Chris has the video games going on, but there's something else.
Chris, let's start with you.
Yeah, no, video games certainly is one of those things. It's funny you caught that. Good. Wow, paying attention. It's pretty good. I think learning how to set boundaries has always been something that I like to think about intentionally. Right now I'm in Mexico with my family, so that's been good. So yeah, it's for me, it's boundaries, knowing when to log off and do basketball coaching. I do these other things that it's really just me and not anything to do with my work life. So and that's been a struggle though. That's taken a long time to be able to fully disconnect. I don't think I fully disconnect, but understanding what that takes is a learning experience for me. But basketball, video games, family, vacations, that kind of thing.
Jill, do you want to take a shot?
Yeah, I think that's an evolving question. I'm 52 now, and I think I take care of myself a lot better than I did when I was 42 and a lot better when I was 32, but then I still forget things because you get so lost in like the holidays come, and so I tend to lose myself. But for me, I've developed a meditation practice that I'm pretty consistent with, and that is just incredibly helpful for me because I'm very type A, and I tend to be like so many people in this culture, just caught up so much in all the vibration of go, 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 busy, 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 do. So meditation really helps me just get grounded. I do yoga, I do, lots of self-help or well-being practices, but I think meditation for me has just become more of a core because it's not about well-being, it's more about becoming deeply in touch with who I am. And so it's a lot about I don't know, just not getting so caught up in all of my thoughts about myself. Oh, you didn't do this right. Like Chris talked about being a perfectionist. I know a lot of us know about that, right? And so we get so caught up in it. Or you, Jim, talked about the mediation and how it can be so emotional and so draining. And I'm also an attorney, and so yesterday I got so caught up in this what was happening with this case anyway. And I was so caught up that I slept late, and I could instantly feel bad about myself. So, but instead I've developed a really strong gratitude practice. And rather than feeling bad about myself, I just was like, well, yay, like how lucky am I that I could sleep in, and I've organized my life in such a way that I don't have to be at the office, at any particular time. And so I just, I forgive myself a lot for a lot of things that society tells me I shouldn't do. And it's huge. And I love what Chris said, setting boundaries is so key. And I think it's really important to constantly or to continually reset your boundaries, take a look at them and see where they're not working for you. So those are a lot of things.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I do several things when I don't watch the news. I haven't watched the news for 15 years. I don't miss it. I get it via text. The news is not news, it's entertainment. Turn it off. Tell everybody to turn it off. It's a waste of your time. I don't do social media hardly at all. Almost all of my notifications are turned off on any device I have. Those are just little annoyances that you don't need. Science shows every little disturbance you get like that, it takes you about 20 minutes to refocus your attention. Turn them off, leave them home. Don't watch the news, don't watch TV. My prior job, I was the consul general in Frankfurt, had 900 people working for me. I'd be working 16, 17 hours a day. I never got tired, ever, because it was a joy to do that job every day. I showed up as myself. I didn't have to worry about anything. Just, if you don't like me, I'm going home. Fine, I'm happy about that. So, showing up as you are and really being comfortable with who you are in your skin makes a huge difference. I never get tired, well, except with Chris during coaching sessions. The people, they, when you connect with people that way and you're not trying to fix them and you're not trying to tell them what's right or wrong, when you're just present with people, there is a joy in that. There's a positive energy in that. I never come out of a coaching session feeling tired or stressed, ever. And if I did, I'd fire the coachee because I don't want to be with that person. Right. But I can't imagine that happening. I don't get connected with people that are going to tire me out. So, showing up, being present, and being intentional and in that moment, there's nothing to tire me. I get physically tired sometimes. We climbed to the top of Cocoa Head the other day with my wife and I slept very well that evening, but mentally tired, almost never. So.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was my own little personal question I love to ask, as I think we all at some point are trying to find some balance.
Stop watching the news. Turn off your
Yes,
notifications.
Someone actually, something that really resonated with me, it's not about balance lately. It feels as though survival many times.
Yeah.
So I think the boundaries, being able to disconnect is so essential. Meditation, just you find your glee wherever it may be, basically. So thank you, Jim, Chris, Jill also. So what a treat,
exactly. That's Jill.
allowing us to learn about your work and the wealth of knowledge that can guide us as future peace builders and different peace building projects. I appreciate you opening up, just being honest about. I think one thing that wasn't talked about was humor and how powerful that is, just as a form of connection and relationship building. And so thank you for practicing that today and always. And thank you for just your kindness and your leadership, for exploring, our journey into this profession as peace builders. But last but not least, thank you to the audience today for being here, and appreciate your interest and support of, building community for Careers in Peace Building Talk Story series.